Okay, hi and welcome to my presentation about QML Hot Reload. It's called a deep dive. I'm Alex, CTO of Felgo. In the beginning, I want to tell something about Felgo. So we are a Qt technology partner and a Qt service partner. We're working with Qt for more than 14 years now. We're actually based in Vienna in Austria, but we're working from worldwide. So we do have secondary offices in Cluj-Napoca in Romania, for example, also in Linz in Austria. We are basically offering products on top of Qt, so like the Felgo SDK that adds additional APIs and development tools to the Qt ecosystem. And we also use our learnings from the product development to offer professional services like Qt consulting, like Qt QML training, or just project work. And yeah, this presentation is about Hot Reload. So why do we actually want to use Hot Reload? We face multiple challenges in the UI and UX development of our products. So my statement here is actually improving the UI and UX in your product is inefficient. Why is it that way? Well, usually there are lots of small adaptations and iterations in your code. So if you're developing something in the UI, you oftentimes need to iterate the code until it's perfect. This takes up a lot of time. Furthermore, testing requires the deployment to real devices to actually see it in context. And probably also have some deliveries for stakeholders. So you need to build it, deploy it, provide it. And this also takes up your time that you're not working on your product. Then there is also a big communication overhead. So requirements might change over time. You re-implement stuff more often than you actually want to do it. And also behavior might change. So a UX pattern that's working today might not work like 2 years in the future, something like that. And last but not least, given that a lot of teams now work remotely and customers might be abroad, the communication is actually harder than ever. So maintaining a good UI and UX for your product is actually kind of like a complex and ongoing process. And we as developers need the right tools to make it more efficient again. And that's where Code Reload comes into the play. Let's have a look at the classical development cycle. So usually you work on your code, you save it, you compile it, deploy it, and then you test it on your devices. And with the test results, you're going back into your code and iterate it. When we have a look at the bottom two steps, actually the compile and deploy time, you see that this is actually time where you're not actively working on your code, but you're just waiting until it's finished. This can take up seconds, but if it's a bigger project, it can also be like minutes. And if you have multiple test devices where you need to test, this actually multiplies. And given that you do this multiple times a day, you see that there is a lot of time spent just for waiting until the code is deployed and you can actually test it. With Code Reload, you actually can skip the deploy and the compile step. So if you're using Code Reload, you can make your development more efficient. For example, if you're using a loader item or something like that to reload your QML UI, you already have the advantage that you don't need to build, package, and deploy your application, and you even probably can apply the changes without restarting your application. So this already is a big time saver. And given that QML and JavaScript are actually dynamic languages, Code Reload is also ideal for fast UI building and iterating on your code. So Code Reload already can save you hours of your development by removing the waiting times. But there is one problem. If you're actually using a loader to reload your QML UI, your changes are applied to your running program without the package and deploy steps. But with Code Reload, you usually always reload the full QML tree. So you're recreating UI from scratch. And then all items are recreated and they actually lose the current application state. And there are actually two implications. The first one is that you need to start over and over again when you're testing. And the second one is that your UI might get out of sync with your backend. I'm coming back to that in a minute. So how can we improve that? Actually, we are going from Code Reload to a Hot Reload. So what is Hot Reload? With Hot Reload, again, you're automatically applying changes to your running program. You can skip the build, package, and deploy steps. But in addition, with Hot Reload, you actually apply the changes while preserving the current application state and the context. So what does this mean? Coming back to our issues. Mostly, when you're developing UI, you're multiple clicks away. So imagine you're having your application, there is a little bit of a startup time, then you might have a user login or something like that, and then you need to navigate to your subscreen, probably a subscreen on a settings page or something like that, and you need to click it and then navigate to this each time you're actually trying to test something. With Hot Reload, you can actually work on that screen without losing it. So you don't need to start over and over again. And you often want to see a UI in connection with the real data. So if you just mock your data or just isolate your screen and do the code reload on this one, you lose the context where you're working in. So you want to see your real data and you want to see it in combination with other screen elements probably. With Hot Reload, your UI is always in sync with the backend, so the context is kept and you can just work on the code that you want to test. So which tool is actually available for Hot Reload? As mentioned, you can use a loader, but the only Hot Reload tool on the market that's actually working for hot reloading with Qt is actually the Felgo QML Hot Reload, which I want to introduce here. With Hot Reload, your app keeps running with the current state, and the changes are applied on top, as already mentioned. Furthermore, you can connect multiple devices and platforms simultaneously, so this means it's kind of like the Qt cross-platform approach. So you can code on Windows, and you can run it remotely on embedded devices, for example. So you can even use solutions like the Android Automotive Application Launcher or something like that. That's not a problem. It also works with your custom C++ code, so you don't need to write any mock code. And it also integrates with a favorite IDE. So Hot Reload is a standalone tool you can use. We provide some plugins for Qt Creator or Visual Studio Code, for example, but you can use it with whichever IDE or code editor you actually wanted to use. So what's required to use Hot Reload? There are some steps in the beginning, and those are only a few steps. First of all, we need to install it, of course. Hot Reload comes with an installer, and you're installing two components. First, there's the Hot Reload GUI application. This one is actually installed on your local development machine, and it listens for your code changes in your IDE. It also connects your application with the Hot Reload mechanism. And you also install a Hot Reload library. So this one gets linked to your actual application on your target device. And that's the next step. So you prepare your project, you're linking this Hot Reload library. We provide packages for CMake, QMake, MS Build. So if you're using Visual Studio, in that example, we're using CMake and having a Felgo Hot Reload package. And in your C++ code, you actually create an object of Felgo Hot Reload and use that one instead of loading your main QML file. And that's basically it. So you don't need to do any changes in your QML code. You can then configure your project, or you can just run it right away, which looks like this one. So here actually we have a Windows machine, and we have connected an application on the desktop, as well as an embedded display and some tablets. So this all works in parallel. Okay, so time for a demo. What you see here is that I already loaded up a demo project. It's an e-bike HMI. You see in the top left window. That's actually a demo of the Boot to Qt offering that shipped with Qt 5.15. And you also see an additional window at the bottom left corner, which is actually the Felgo Hot Reload GUI application. This one, as already mentioned, listens for code changes in Qt Creator, for example, and then applies the changes to all connected devices. In our case, it's just a desktop application, but as mentioned, you can also connect multiple devices in parallel. So let's work on the UI. First, we do something simple probably. So we can change some properties or property values. You see that mode selection here, where you can switch between the cruise and the sport mode. Imagine we want to change the cruise mode to an echo mode. So what I'm doing right now is I'm opening that modebox QML file, and I change the text property from cruise to echo, and I'm saving, and we see it's instantly applied. And we might also want to change the color of the sport mode, so I can open up the color property binding here. I'm adding the red color, I'm saving, and we see that the sport mode is now red. Still, while we are in our screen, we did not lose the state that we had before. So that's working good actually. Next, we can also change some JavaScript logic. For that, I open the navigation mode here, and let's add a route to Vienna, where our headquarters are located. Route is calculated. And yeah, we see it's now 615 and a bit kilometers until Vienna. And we might want to get rid of that floating point number. So what I can do is I'm opening that Navi trip info file. I look for the text label, and then I change the JavaScript to fixed function to use 0 digits. And after saving, I actually see that the floating point number is gone. And I might also want to change the clock format. So here, I can open the clock view at the very top, and I can change the locale setting from the American one to the German one, probably, adding DE, I'm saving, and now we see it's the 24-hour clock format. So that's changing properties and property values, but we can also do something more advanced. So probably let's work a bit on the QML tree. For that one, I can open up the settings view, and I want to get rid of the reset demo button here probably and add a new row to change the clock format. So I can look for that button, the round button here. I can remove it. I can also update the label already and reuse it, saving this one. And we see the button is gone and the label is already updated. And now we can copy over this toggle switch here and add it to our configuration item. So adding a new item, removing the duplicate ID, removing some logic here, saving. And now I see that the toggle is up and running. I can already use it. The next step would actually be to connect it to the backend logic, but that's out of scope here. Then another example, QML singletons. So going back to the main screen, imagine you want to change this dark theme to a light theme. So I can open up the colors QML file, and you see that's a singleton file in QML, and I can now replace all the white colors with the black ones and probably switch the background from a dark one to a light one. And you now see there are 17 changes actually applied, and we see that our UI is changing the color. And I'm still in the, basically in the navigation to Vienna. And I can also undo it. So I just use Control-Z, I saved, and we see we are in the dark theme again now. Then the next topic is error handling. So imagine something goes wrong during development. You're having probably a syntax error, something in your code. This usually means if you're firing up your QML application that you get either an error or you get a crash, but it's not working. So let's see what it's actually looking like with Hot Reload. So I'm adding here a syntax error. So for example, adding some characters in here and saving. We are now seeing this error screen. So I see in which file and which line number I actually have an error. And I can now work on it again. I can fix the error and I can save again. And now we are in a valid QML state again. And what you see is that we are still navigating to Vienna. So I did not lose my application state here again. And this does not only work with like syntax errors. So imagine we're using an invalid component or like a property, an invalid property of a component. We can also try this one. I'm adding an invalid property to the rectangle here and saving it. And then we see actually an error message that there is a non-existing property in line 92. And I can even copy it to the second rectangle. So I can see multiple errors, not only the first error. And now I can again work to actually fix my errors. Or if I'm testing something else and I'm not ready yet for fixing the errors, I can also use the hide button here. I can still navigate in my app in the last like working tree that I used. And as soon as I'm ready, then I can then like fix my errors. I'm removing the first error. I see there is still another error. I can fix the second error. And then I'm back at a valid QML state and I can continue working on it. So this is really helpful during development, and it saves a lot of time that I don't need to start over again. Good, that was the demo. So how does it work? Some internals of Felgo Hot Reload. For a Hot Reload to work, actually there are two phases. First, there is the startup phase, and then we have the app run phase. For the startup phase, first we pass your project. So we identify the QML files and QML modules that you actually want to use for hot reloading. This is based on a configuration, but what's new and what's coming next with the upcoming release in Hot Reload is that we also auto-detect the configuration from your project files. You don't need to provide that manually anymore. Then, after identifying all those QML files, we annotate those QML files. So basically, we are adding some metadata for runtime mapping of the underlying source code and the QML scene graph that's running in the program. You can see this like similar to symbol injection in C++ debug builds. The goal of this is not only like to be able to actually hot reload and update the QML tree, but we also use this to like show error messages that point to the original file and the original line number. And then the last step for the startup is to load the annotated files instead of your actual project source files, and you're ready for the first hot reload. And this hot reload not only works for your QML code and QML modules, but you can also use other resources like hot reload images or font files or videos or whatever. And then we're in the app run phase. So our program is like up and running, and we are now waiting until users actually edit source files in their IDE. So the files are now observed on the file system level. This has a side effect, a nice one, compared to tools like Gamma Ray, where you might change properties during runtime to test things out. When we're doing this on the file system level, we have the advantage that the changes are persisted right away. So if you change something, you have that git diff, for example, already, and you commit it once you're ready. So you don't lose actually the changes that you were trying out. Then we create a diff. So hot reload looks for the component changes in the QML scene graph. And this is done by comparing the running QML tree and the potential new one that we created from the changes you already applied to your QML files. And hot reload not only checks for changes, but also for additions and removals. So for properties and property values, for items, for JavaScript functions, for QML imports, for files or other resources. And those changes from the diff then are applied actually to the running program on all the connected devices, which is like the main step, updating the QML tree. So we basically update the QML scene graph with all the updates. And this might sound trivial in the beginning, but there are plenty of special cases that need attention, otherwise the QML state would go south. For example, changes can be anywhere in the component hierarchy. So if you're changing one QML file, it can be at the root level, but it can also be somewhere deep in a loader or something like that. Then also newly created or deleted items can have bindings that need to be updated, otherwise the app would just crash with an invalid binding. And dynamic components from loaders or delegates or list items are also a special case. So first of all, we need to update the QML components cache for newly created elements, but we also need to update already created items in the QML tree. And last but not least, there might be some deactivated items in the loader that were already used before. We also need to update the deactivated items as well. And yeah, last but not least, there is also JavaScript code and signal handlers and broker scripts. So there might be like invalid QML references or invalid bindings that also need to be updated in the JavaScript code. So as an example, probably let's look at the animation. If we want to change the target property of an animation, it's not only like replacing that property, but there are multiple steps involved. First of all, we need to re-evaluate the value of the old target property and persist it. Then we need to bind the new target to the animation. We need to evaluate the old target's property to the new target's property. And then we also need to check if the properties and the values are actually matching. So if we can apply the hot reload, if like the types are matching. And last but not least, we also need to restart the animation if it was running before. And this gets even more complicated. So if we consider animation groups like that sequential animation that we're having here in that example, or if you're having bindings on animations, like you're using this in JavaScript code again. So yeah, there are a lot of updates involved actually by just changing one property. How are we doing this? Well, we're using a lot of Qt private APIs. There is the Qt meta object used. There are the meta types. There is the v4 JavaScript engine. Basically a lot of stuff that's going on in the background. But this allows us to change the structure of the QML tree and the JavaScript and to rebuild and re-evaluate only the bindings that really need an update and not all bindings and not all items. And all this without actually restarting the application or losing the application state. And the last step is actually reporting the status back to the hot reload application and to the GUI. So if all went fine, we are just transferring the log output to the desktop again, to your development machine. If there is an error in code, we already saw that. We actually use the last valid QML tree, so you can still test your code. And the error is reported on the screen, so you actually can resolve the error and then go over to the next iteration. And after that one, you're ready for the next iteration. So the cycle begins from listening for changes, and then the QML tree is updated again. So as a summary of Hot Reload, this is a standalone tool for Qt. It runs with all supported Qt versions and platforms. It's actually the only code Hot Reload solution for Qt that's on the market right now. So it preserves the state and context, and you have your real data in place. There are no QML code changes required, so the setup time is usually within an hour. And yeah, there is no footprint or other dependencies added to your project. So you only add this to your debug build, and there is no trace in your shipped code. So this is really only a development tool. And then there is that error handling I already talked about. So the detailed error messages, the error failover and the rollback, and also the QML modules approach. So you can reload your own QML modules. You can reload external QML modules. You can even reload QML modules if you're keen enough. And yeah, this all actually sums up to added time savings. You keep your application state in their context, and that speeds up your development and keeps you focused on your tasks. So it's a huge efficiency gain. This can sum up to 2 hours per day if you're primarily working on QML. And yeah, if multiple developers are actually working on the project, of course, this also multiplies. So usually, if you're used to it, you don't want to code without it. And that brings me to the end, actually. Probably you already have seen it in action at our booth. We will be there for probably 5 or 10 more minutes if you're interested. You can also contact us for a free evaluation at felgo.com/hotreload. And yeah, if there are any questions, I would be happy to answer those now. Thank you.